Vintage Gucci is one of the most faked brands out there, and sometimes the differences between real and fake items are very subtle and very tricky to spot. So in today's video we're going to be talking about the different things to look out for when you are trying to decide if a vintage Gucci piece is real or a fake. And we've also got some real life examples to kind of show you as well, so you know exactly what to look for when you are trying to authenticate a piece. So we've recently been sourcing a lot of vintage Gucci pieces for our business House of Jamz. So deciding if something is real or a fake, trying to authenticate items is something that we've been starting to take a lot more seriously, and we've been starting to look into how to do this, correctly, and obviously think about what type of things to look out for. Obviously, this is just a little quick disclaimer. This is how we authenticate things. There are lots of different things to look out for when authenticating things. This is just what we look for, so I just kind of quickly wanted to say that at the very beginning. So the first key thing you want to be looking at when you're trying to authenticate your vintage Gucci piece is the materials that are being used. So the things that we're looking at are mainly wallets and purses, so kind of small leather goods. So looking at the quality of the canvas, because a lot of vintage Gucci pieces are made of canvas, looking at the quality of the leather as well. So what you're going to be looking out for is if these materials feel quite substantial, if they feel, quite weighty, they feel good quality, they're quite thick. What you don't want to be feeling or seeing is things that are quite thin, that look or feel like they might rip quite easily, or if they're maybe too plasticky feeling. So usually on the leather as well, there'll be a bit of a texture to the leather, unless it's like a patent smooth leather, but a lot of the time there'll be a little bit of a grain to the leather as well. So got a little example here. We've got a little Gucci brown canvas and leather wallet, and obviously you can't feel how it feels through the camera, but I hope you can see that with the canvas you can really see the grain, the texture in the canvas. It does feel quite substantial, and the same with the leather. Like even the leather stud feels substantial. It's not too thin, it's definitely not plasticky, and this is what I'm meaning by seeing like the texture and the grain in the leather. Now obviously this is a little bit worn because it is a vintage piece, but even on the inside you can see there, just where the light's hitting it, you can see the grain and stuff on the leather. And as I mentioned before, not all leather is going to look like that, especially if it's been made out of patent leather, which is smooth and shiny, or like a smoother leather. But a lot of the vintage pieces do have that grain. So the next thing you're going to be looking at when trying to decide if your piece is authentic is the stitching. So a lot of the time on Gucci pieces, the stitching will be around like the edges of the pieces, especially on the inside, attaching the pockets or the compartments to the main part of the purse or the wallet. So what you're going to be looking for is quite, again, substantial feeling stitching, especially if they're stitching together leather or leather and canvas, because those are quite thick materials, so they'll need substantial stitches to keep the piece together. So quite thick feeling stitches, straight stitches, so you don't want to be looking for any squint wonky stitches, and the stitches should be the same size, so consistent stitch size as well. Another thing to kind of look out for is loose threads. Now obviously if it is a vintage piece, there may be some loose threads on like the corners, on where the pockets are attached to the main part of the wallet. That's just from wear and tear. But if there's loose stitches and it's a newer piece, so I'm not talking about vintage, or if it's a piece that is in otherwise really good condition and then there's some stitches that are fraying and it just doesn't look quite right, that could be a little bit of a red flag. So the good thing about a lot of Gucci pieces is that the stitching is usually a nice contrasted colour to the main part of the wallet. So this is a good example where we've got a dark coloured wallet, light coloured stitching. So you can see here that the stitching is all the same size, so each stitch is the same size. You can also see it is very straight along the edge of the leather, and as it's attaching, or it's not, I don't know if it's attaching or if it's just a top stitch to kind of, for decorative purposes, but you can see the stitches are not made of really thin thread, they're actually quite substantial, substantial thread that's being used. Now here's a little example here, I don't know if you could see, what corner is it, this one here, a tiny little loose thread there. Now as you can see there, the stitching has actually come undone on that corner. Now, as this is a vintage piece, and as, because of where it is, it's on the corner, it's an area that is going to have a lot of wear, it's going to be getting, rubbed against things, that I wouldn't be worried about. So this is something that you can, really easily just trim off, make it look nice and neat. It's not causing anything to come apart or anything like that. So if you see sort of loose threads like that on like a vintage piece, I wouldn't really be too concerned, because the rest of the you know, the piece is very neat, very tidy, is very, very well held together. It'd be more if you were seeing like, you know, bigger bits of thread coming off all over the piece, especially if the rest of the piece is in really good condition or it's a new piece. So the next thing that you're going to be wanting to look out for to authenticate your Gucci piece is serial numbers. So this can be quite tricky. So I've got a couple of examples here where the serial numbers are really easily found. So this is again a vintage piece. See there, right inside under that flap, and it's in gold text, really easy to spot. So some pieces, like these pieces, you know, you might just have to open up one of the flaps or even look in one of the card slots or something and it'll be printed there. Another example we've got here, yeah, this is a little bit more faded, but again, really easy to spot. And we've got our serial number there in gold and really, as I said, really easy to spot. However, there are times when the serial number isn't actually printed in like a gold or a different coloured text. Sometimes it could actually be kind of like embossed into the leather, so it's almost like it's been pressed into the leather, and it's actually quite tricky to find. So when James was going through all of our Gucci wallets that we have here, he had to get his torch out and he had to actually, you know, really look into all the card slots, the coin compartments and everything like that, and he managed to find all the serial numbers. However, it did take him a little while, so sometimes they might be quite easy to find like that, you know, printed, really obvious. Sometimes you might have to really go digging into all the different compartments and sort of look to the edge of the compartment. So a lot of the time, for example, if we had a piece like this, instead of it being maybe, I don't know, like there along the top, it might be, obviously it wouldn't be on here because it's on the canvas if that's nylon, but inside it might be like right into the edge, or it, you know, it's almost hidden almost, so it can be a little bit tricky to find them. I've even seen on bags, Gucci bags, that the serial numbers are actually even behind the lining. So obviously you don't want to be taking apart a bag to try and find the serial number, but that's just another possibility to keep in mind as well. So when you do find the serial numbers, a lot of the time they are just numbers. There's not usually any letters in the ones that I've seen anyway. And also keep in mind that if you do find a serial number, it's not guaranteed that it means it's authentic. What's a good thing to do is take the serial number, look it up online, and make sure that that number that you've got matches the style of the item, because you don't want the case that if it has been faked, somebody's just printed a bunch of random numbers on your piece just to make it look like it's a serial number. So you can always double check just to be completely 100% confident that the number matches the piece that you've got. So the next thing to look out for is probably one of the things that a lot of people go to first, is the logos. So there's a few different logos that you can be looking for. You can obviously be looking for the printed logos, which is usually on the inside of the item. So for example, I'll just grab the piece that I had there a second ago, something like that. So as you can see, the Gucci logo, the text has been printed on the inside of the item. And what you'd be looking for is just making sure that the text is evenly spaced. So again, it's not wonky, it's not squint, it doesn't look like one letter isn't quite in line with the rest. You want it to be looking, you know, very uniform, very in line, well, not symmetrical, but you know what I mean, like very evenly spaced. And same if you've got the Made in Italy one. So something like this, there we go. So as you can see there, we've got Gucci Made in Italy, and instead of it being printed, it's actually kind of like stamped in or embossed into the leather. And again, you're going to be wanting to look for, obviously, that it's spelled correctly and everything, that the letters are quite evenly spaced, it's straight, all that kind of stuff, that it just looks right. So a lot of the time, it's quite funny, sometimes you don't even need to really look at something really closely. If you've got a gut feeling that that doesn't look quite right, it looks a bit off, but you can't maybe pinpoint why, chances are it maybe is a bit off. Other places where you might see the Gucci logo or the Gucci like name printed is on some of the metal or the hardware on the items. So for example here, we've got the Gucci name printed on that little metal trim there. Another example would be, for example here, I don't know if we can get close enough to actually see, we've got Gucci printed, and it's got Gucci Made in Italy actually printed on these little studs. Another little example is printed on like the clasps and the thing. So again, we've got Gucci printed down there, and then you've got the actual Gucci GG logo. Sometimes you might see that rather than the word Gucci. So little example that we had earlier, we've got the Gucci, tiny little Gucci logo there on the on the little gold logo there, and then a bigger one here on the clasp. So you might see details like that as well. So again, you're going to be looking for the same kind of thing. Does it look consistent? Does it look, even, neat? Are the letters evenly spaced? Are they all the same size? If it's the word Gucci, is it spelled correctly? Is it straight? So the next thing we're going to be looking at to help you decide if your piece is authentic is the hardware. So that's going to be the zips, any studs and things like that, any sort of fastenings, openings, all those like sort of metal bits of your pieces. So you're going to be looking for if the zips feel quite sturdy, if they're quite easy to open and close. However, I do feel like that can be a little bit misleading. Obviously today we're talking about Gucci. However, I have a Louis Vuitton bag, and I just thought it was the bag that I had. However, I've noticed on other pieces that have the same kind of zips for Louis Vuitton, the zips are horrendous. They get stuck, they're not easy to move, even the zip pull itself gets kind of stuck round the wrong way. So obviously today we're talking about Gucci, but I know that just because it's a high-end brand doesn't always mean that the way they do their zips and things are the easiest. So that's just something to kind of point out. If you do have a zip and it does get a little bit stuck, doesn't necessarily mean it's a red flag or that it's fake or anything. But usually the zips are quite easy to open, they feel good quality, the zip pulls are nice and weighty, heavy, they're not plasticky or thin feeling, and the same with the studs and everything. Again, they feel quite weighty, and usually on a lot of the zips, and especially on the studs, especially for Gucci, they do actually have the name Gucci written into the studs, like stamped into the studs and things. So that's something else to look out for. So if you grab this wallet here, again, I don't know if you can really see, but the name Gucci, here we go, is on that part of the stud. So it's not the stud part, the top part that goes in, it's the section that the actual stud part goes into, like the hole. Usually the name Gucci will be printed there as well. Not on every piece, but it's just something extra to kind of look out for. So for zips, again, this is quite a nice, thick, heavy duty, good feeling zip, nice good quality. And I don't know if you can see, again, very small, but we do have the name, the Gucci name on it as well. There we go. So yeah, so it's not printed on it, it's like kind of engraved into it. So you'll normally see zips like that will have the name or the logo, and the zip really easily functions, and it's a nice good quality zip. Like, it's not thin, or it doesn't feel like it's going to break really easily. It feels really sturdy as well. So another thing to check to help you authenticate your Gucci piece is the lining of any of your pieces. So again, you're going to be looking for neat lining, neat stitching, no sort of raw edges, loose threads, or stitches that are sort of lining that's coming apart, anything like that. Obviously, if it is a vintage piece, there may be signs of wear and things like that. That's totally fine, but it's actually the main sort of how the lining's been put into the piece, or how the lining's been made. That's what you're going to be looking for. So again, very good quality stitching, really sturdy feeling, doesn't feel like you can kind of put your finger through it or anything like that. So a lot of the time on things like purses and wallets, the lining inside will probably be potentially leather. So again, we're looking for very neat edges, clean stitching that's, each stitch is the same size, it's nice and straight, and you can see again it's very good quality, doesn't feel like it's going to rip very easily. Another thing to think about with the lining is obviously the materials that are being used. So I've just had a little look through our pieces there. I was actually trying to see if I can find a piece that had like that nylon material, but I'm going to be honest with you, all these pieces that we've got are actual leather on the inside. So that's another sign that, especially with wallets and purses and things, that they use really good quality materials for the lining as well. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking to see, even for some of these wallets and stuff, it's all leather on the inside. Even though it changes material, I actually thought that black part was maybe not canvas, nylon, but actually when I feel it, it's not, it's leather, it's just a different colour. So that's actually a nice little surprise that all the pieces do actually have really good quality materials, even on the inside. So now we're going to talk about some of the common red flags to look out for if you have a Gucci piece and you're not 100% sure that it's authentic. So some of the things that we've kind of mentioned already, but we'll go through them, is things like the logos looking a bit off. So this could mean that they're squint, the letters are maybe different sizes, there's maybe, you know, uneven gaps between each of the letters in the name Gucci, or if it says made in Italy on it. If the logo itself is a bit off, it's not quite the right shape, it looks a little bit inconsistent with, you know, what you can see online and things like that if you were to double check the logo. As I said, if it's on the item wonky or squint, or yeah, it just doesn't look, the placement of it doesn't look quite right. So if we have a little look at an example here with the logo, we can see they've printed that logo in the corner, and you can see that it's been printed not only straight compared to the bottom, so if I hold it straight, it's been printed straight compared to the bottom, but also down this side as well. So it's been printed nice and sort of perpendicular, like nice in the corner. It's not wonky, it's not squint, it's not slanted or anything like that. So that's what you're kind of looking out for. Another thing to look out for is the serial numbers. So again, if they're printed a bit unevenly, if they look a bit, you know, wonky, they don't look straight. Again, with this piece, we've got our serial number in here, and again, it's nice and straight in line with that stitching line there, and it's in the middle of the piece, and you can kind of look how it lines up with the stud, that it's nice and in the middle, it's not to one side or anything like that. Obviously, if it was right over to one side, like deliberately, that's probably fine because it looks deliberate. But if it was here, but it was maybe just a little bit to the one side, that doesn't look like it's meant to be like that. So a lot of it, when you're looking at the logos and the serial numbers, if you're trying to see if it figures out, if you're trying to figure out if it looks right, just think, does that look, you know, neat? Does it look deliberate? Were they meant to have put it there? Does that, you know, does it look straight? All that kind of stuff. Usually, a lot of the time you'll be able to look at a logo and things, and if you do feel like it looks a bit off but you can't quite pick out why, it usually is. Your eye's really good at picking up if something's not quite right. And then obviously it's really good to check that the words have been spelled correctly. So don't get too caught up in trying to figure out if a logo looks, you know, straight and things. Obviously check that the word Gucci's been spelled correctly. If it says made in Italy or anything like that, check that, you know, the spellings of the words are correct as well, because obviously that's a massive, you know, red flag. So another thing to think about is the materials that are being used. So do the materials feel good quality? Do they feel quite weighty? Do they feel, you know, nice and thick? Do the, you know, the leather, canvas, the inside as well? I mentioned earlier about the inside of a lot of these wallets and purses are actually made of leather, just a different colour leather. That's not to say there might not be authentic vintage pieces that might have, you know, that nylon kind of material inside, but I actually haven't come across any here, so that might be a little thing there, that if it is made of like a cheaper feeling material inside, that's definitely something to maybe double check. Obviously on the outside, if it feels cheap and thin and plasticky, you know, that could be a little bit of a red flag as well. And then obviously again, looking at your hardware, are your zips quite sticky? You know, do the zips feel not made of metal? Do they feel like they're maybe made of that plastic that's coated in a metal kind of colour? If you were, you know, if there's any sort of chipping coming off with the zips, does it look like plastic underneath? All those kind of things as well, with the studs and stuff to look out for, you know, anything like that could also be a red flag as well. And then obviously if the stitching's not right, so if the stitching is uneven, if the stitches are all different sizes, if it's squint, if it's, you know, if it looks like the thread is really thin and poor quality and it's coming out and there's a lot of loose threads and things, could also be a red flag. Now, just want to point out, even though your piece might have one of these things, doesn't mean that it's not authentic or that it's fake. It could be that it's a vintage piece, so there's a bit more wear. It could also mean that if it's a really old piece, maybe some things are maybe not quite the same as what, you know, Gucci is like nowadays. However, if there's quite a few of these things that you've noticed, quite a few of these red flags, that's maybe when you may need to start to think about, is this piece authentic? So I just also wanted to point out on the flip side of that, when you're trying to authenticate something, if you're looking at a piece and all the things that we've kind of mentioned to look out for to see if it's authentic, just because your piece has one of them doesn't mean that it's definitely authentic. What you're looking for is to try and almost check off as many things as possible to see if your piece is authentic. So just because your piece might have a serial number doesn't mean it's authentic. As I said before, there's a way to check to make sure the number matches the type of item you've got. Just because you've got the Gucci logo on it doesn't mean it's authentic. What you want to be doing is trying to find loads of these things, and each thing that you do find kind of ups the chance of it being authentic. So everything we've mentioned in this video today is exactly what we've been doing when we've been checking through our Gucci pieces just to doubly make sure that they're authentic, and it just gives us the confidence that when we're listing the items, we know that they're 100% authentic. Obviously, where we source them from, we are already assured that they're authentic, but it's nice to just have that extra level of assurance. And actually, it's proven quite useful already. So just a little story, we actually have listed our items on our Vintage store, our eBay store, a few pieces on Etsy as well, which I'll actually need to come back to that in a little second. We then went to list a few pieces on Depop. Most of them were fine, but 2 of the pieces were flagged as being not authentic. Now, I'm so glad that we've spent all this time, researching how to check our pieces and to look for the serial numbers and things, because we were able to really easily appeal those 2 items and say, actually, no, they are authentic, and send them the photos of all the things, the logos, the close-ups, the serial numbers, all that stuff that we've just spoken about. And I've just had an email pop through there just now for both of those pieces saying that they made a mistake. So Depop, obviously, I think they're using, kind of automated bots and things to try and flag fake pieces, which, is totally fine. As I said before, there's a lot of fake Gucci out there. So that's just nice to know that we're really confident in our own ability to authenticate pieces, that we were able to quickly appeal that, send them the evidence that they wanted, even though I actually uploaded those same pictures to the listing anyway. You'd think they would check from that, but whatever. So we were able to appeal it and got it overturned in less than 24 hours. So that is just something, if you've got that extra level of confidence in yourself that you're able to authenticate your own pieces, that is great to have, especially if you're selling vintage luxury goods. Which brings me back to what I mentioned a second ago about Etsy. So one of those pieces, which makes me think maybe I've not taken the clearest pictures of it, but again, we'll come back to that. Maybe the logos aren't super duper clear, but Etsy also flagged one of those pieces as being fake, and from what I know, Etsy is very strict with all, that kind of stuff. So not appealed Etsy yet, but we will, because I feel like, again, they're using the same kind of thing, like an automated bot or something, to try and weed out the fakes. So we'll be appealing that as well. But as I said, it's just nice to know that we know for definite that the pieces are real. We're able to authenticate them to a certain extent ourselves. And so that is just good, just to have that level of confidence, not just if you're selling, Gucci vintage pieces, but also if you're just looking to buy pieces. It's really useful to know what to look out for. So I thought it'd be really useful just to share a very quick test that you can do when you're looking for things online, or if you're looking for things in person, vintage Gucci pieces in person. A very quick little test that you can do just to check if you think something, to help you make that decision very quickly, if it's real or fake. So look at the materials. Are they good quality? Do they feel good quality, or do they feel cheap and plasticky? The stitching. Is the stitching even? Is there any loose threads? Is there any wonky stitching, or is it all nice and straight? And logos. Can you easily spot any printed or embossed logos on the leather or the material, or does the hardware have logos? So those would be the 3 top things that I would be checking if you're just wanting to make a really quick decision if your piece is fake or if it's authentic. So if you've ever been unsure about any vintage Gucci pieces, and you've maybe got a question about how to check something, or your own experience that you want to share, comment below. Would love to hear about it. I just find it really interesting how different people's experiences, especially when they're trying to authenticate things and learn about different items, just super duper interesting. So if you found this video useful or interesting, make sure and subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos, and we'll see you in our next one.